Hello, everybody. I'm John Miller, Director of Membership and Communication for the Ecological Society of America, and welcome to this, I hope, brief overview of modern resumes and how you can present your best resume when you're applying for jobs. Note that this is looking at jobs that are more in the quote-unquote non-scientific space, as you may want to take a different approach when applying for research positions in labs or in academia or something like that. Also, while I may not seem like the best candidate to present this information to you, given my role with ESA, I actually spent several years working in career services and support with another large nonprofit. So I actually do know a thing or two, and am extremely interested at cocktail parties. So let's take a quick look at what we're going to be talking about in this session. We will discuss at a high level what a resume is and how you should think of one and what the most important components of any resume are. We'll explore the three main styles of resume and talk about how to use them. We'll look at formatting concerns and other general best practices just when you put a resume together. And then we'll take a little bit of a step into the storytelling element of the whole thing, examining how and why that matters on a resume, and also how you need to do that on the cover letter that you definitely always absolutely should, without a shadow of a doubt, include when the employer asks you to do so. So let us dive right in. Oh, and I'm going to show you a number of examples over the course of this presentation. I grabbed almost all of them from zeti.com, which is a good resource for you looking up things about resumes, cover letters, CVs, whatever have you. It's a good resource. Check it out. Let's just dive right in though. In a nutshell, there are a few high-level things that distinctly make a resume a resume. There are questions that you're trying to answer with that document, is really more or less what it comes down to. One very important thing that you need to remember is that a resume is not a CV. While you should definitely have a home for major projects and publications and other things like that, even on your resume, if they pertain to the job that you want, what you want to avoid is getting into that full list of like every citation and presentation and other scientific work that you've done. Instead, what you want to show the hiring manager on your resume is why you're the right person for this one particular job that you're applying for, which usually does not involve a whole bunch of citations. So to that end, the resume should really be a summary of your relevant history that puts your strengths and achievements at the forefront, and that connects the dots between what you have done and what you can do, and then what you want to aspire to do. That is the job that you're applying for. So that in the mind of the person reading your resume, it should be painting a picture of how well you can be doing the job that they're trying to fill. And you saying right out loud that you're the right person for that opportunity. So what does that actually look like? It looks pretty much like this. The resume that I have copied in here is a sample that I pulled from a different website that isn't Zeti. Unfortunately, I don't remember which one right now. But if you think that Ravi Druha sounds like an interesting person, I hate to break it to you, but you probably will not be able to get in touch via either the phone number or email address that are listed here. I'm not sure this person exists, but this resume is a good one to examine because it does have all of those key elements right here on that first page. So you can see there's contact information, of course. I know how I can get in touch with Ravi, right? And there's a little personal summary that says who he is as a professional. There's a chronology of his experience that probably gets a little bit deeper on the second page. And then on that second page, there's no doubt a summary of his education as well as this employment experience. And then very importantly, you see here a skill summary that says right up front what he can do from a technical standpoint, and it also includes some of those all-important transferable skills, which is very important to modern job seeking, and I'll continue to touch on at different points throughout this presentation. So let's just start with the basics, that contact information. It seems like a no-brainer. Definitely do include your contact information, but you would not believe how easy it is to put your name and where you're at and then forget to include the things like your phone number and your email address, which are usually all you need nowadays. People don't use mailing addresses so much on resumes because nobody sends letters in the mail anymore. When you write your name, you should use the name that you're known as professionally, as opposed to maybe your personal regular name or the name that your friends know you as or something like that. I have my full name, Jonathan Miller, on my resume because it sounds more interesting and professional and fancy even than John Miller, not the least of which being that there are like a whole bunch of Johns Miller out there in the world, not all of whom I want to be confused with when I'm applying for a job. I want people to think of me. Granted, I have a very bland and vanilla name as well, which means that sometimes, I need to take advantage of other things. But anyway, my name, where I am, my city and state, and then those pieces of contact information, and that's all that I really need. You don't need to overemphasize this part at all because the space on your resume is limited. I am not saying it really out loud in the context of this overall presentation, but really at most, unless you're basically applying for senior management in an organization, you should be looking at a resume that is the front and back of a single sheet of paper, 2 pages. And some people will tell you that that's too much. If you can't sum up your professional life in less space than that, then you might not be what they're looking for. Frankly, people change jobs too much nowadays for that to be realistic because you just have to mention the things that you have to mention. But don't go beyond that. But in the confines of all of that, you do have limited space, and you want the space that you use to be telling the story that's important. And what's important is not your email address and your 18 social handles. That can come up later, but for right now, keep it simple. What you can see on Robbie's resume is a good example, though, that you can do a little bit of styling to show your personality. Show that you have some, creativity to you, and that's okay. Use some color, use some font changes, stuff like that. Nobody's going to be mad about that. And if you're looking at career opportunities in the creative realm, marketing, communication, even education, some of those little tasteful choices can really make a difference for you. Now, I want to preface this next part by saying that not every resume that exists has either a summary or an objective. And in fact, I personally don't use either of those things. But I also have 15 years of professional experience. For me to include one of these now, unless I'm really trying to do something that isn't super obvious why I'm doing it, it's a waste of space. I like to let my professional experience speak for itself in that regard. But for most people, especially if you're new, or especially if you're in that kind of a role where you're trying to change fields or change levels of responsibility or something like that, you will want to include either a summary or an objective at the very beginning of your resume to just very quickly say who you are professionally, what your responsibilities and skills have been to date, and how those things connect to the job that you're applying for. So here, I'm starting off with the summary. The summary very simply says who you are, what you've done, and why that matters. And if you bear with me, this is a really good example. This is from a sample I took off of Zeddy. Dedicated secondary education teacher with over 8 years of experience in devising individualized curricula within state standards. Eager to join ABC School to utilize expert knowledge of English as a second language teaching methodology, including project and content-based instruction. Prepared 300 plus students for international language certifications with a 99% pass rate. This is great. It says right out what this person is, what they're good at, and it connects the dots between their successes and what they can do for the employer. We can't see the rest of this resume, it's not included here, but it's very likely for an ESA instructor or a person who at least works in in language education and happens to work with with ESL populations, and very likely this is being used in an application for a teaching position at this school called ABC School right here, right? It's phenomenal. It sums up the entire resume in 3 sentences. I love everything about it. Now, conversely, this is particularly pertinent for new people, whether you're like a new grad or you're just stepping into the professional world. An objective rather than a summary can be a really good tool for you. It's even simpler than a summary. A summary is meant to sum up everything that you've done, and attract attention like that. The objective doesn't say what you've done. So professionally, so to speak, I mean, you can include a little bit about what you have done if there's something that you've done, but it's really more about what it is that you're trying to do, what you want to accomplish, or what your goals are. All you need to do is characterize yourself, say what it is, say what that thing is that you're trying to do, and then if you can, make yourself sound good at it, right? If you can tie that into the organization that you're applying for the job with, that's even better. So here's the example. Highly energized sales representative with a BS in biology seeking to enhance sales figures for Azult Medical. Now, I personally have actually never heard of Azult Medical, but that's, if I were there, if I were a hiring manager for them, I feel like I've just learned everything I need to know about this person. They either are engaged in or want to be engaged in sales. They feel that they are good at sales. Their background is in biology, and they seem to be wanting working in medical technology or pharmaceuticals or whatever this company might be. That's a great opening. It really is, and it makes me feel like they're paying attention and that there's a connection there, right? So I'm going to read a little bit more into this resume. Now, what both the objective and the summary have done, though, they're using this particular sort of language that corresponds to the specific skills and experiences that the employer is looking for. And those are the keywords, emphasized keywords, that you should employ when you're customizing your resume for the job. Your keywords should be active. Use verbs, active verbs. Don't use the passive voice. Don't stretch yourself out to find 6 different synonyms for the word achieved. Just say straightforward what you did and why it was good. Quote, managed team of 3 postdoc researchers, end quote. Increased email click-throughs by 18%. Use language that makes you look good. It's perfectly okay to say that you did a thing if you did the thing. And if you're trying to say that you bring a certain expertise, whether it's a technical thing or like a particular interpersonal thing or something like that, whatever it is, you're trying to pitch yourself as an expert in it, say that you are. I did this. It's perfectly okay if you're junior staff to say that you assisted or you helped with something, but you don't want to emphasize that you were, that you maybe just contributed something. You want to emphasize that you did the action, right? You worked on the email campaign. You did the research. There are much better ways for you to show that you're good at teamwork and collaboration than by underselling your own contributions to projects. You want the hiring manager to feel like this is a person with burgeoning leadership skills and a take charge attitude. So all you have to do is choose different verbs and you can get that done. Another thing that you want to do is make a point of using keywords that match the position description. And I cannot stress that enough. Don't read it once, don't read it twice. Read the position description as many times as you need to be able to identify those key, whether they're skills or experiences that the employer is straight up saying that they want. Write them down and then make sure those exact words are included on your resume. The reason for that is that, while as a place like ESA, where we have 20 odd people on staff, I, as a person who I hire somebody, might read each submission and make a sort of like a value judgment of each candidate that way. But in a lot of organizations, especially companies that, big companies, it's HR, human resources, that's reading the resumes and giving them the first pass. Sometimes it's not even them. Sometimes it's a computer. And as such, you want to meet their prejudice is really what it is. Whether it's a computer program or whether it's a human being, their prejudice toward what it says in the description when they're looking for candidates that match the job that's open, right? So match your resume to that. There's one quick trick, but it works, and it's a really effective way of getting yourself, into that next step where maybe you get that phone screen or maybe you get called in for that interview, versus somebody who otherwise has the identical credentials to you. You've done the same things, but now you have this little bit of a competitive advantage. for what it's worth, your keywords are important in every part of the resume. So now that we've kind of gotten that out of the way, we can move on to some of the other most important elements. For most people, your personal history is the bulk of the resume. And so what I'm about to say is somewhat dependent on the style of the resume that you're using. But in general, what you're looking at is having an employment history and an education history. And of course, there are some nuances to how you do each one of those things, but the one rule that pertains to both of is this: don't pad it out. Keep it relevant, keep relevant to the position that you're applying for, that is, and focus on what the things that you've done that make you perfect for that job. Nobody wants to read gigantic walls of text. Nobody wants to read a resume that's just full of irrelevant detail. Stick to the facts. The good ones, they will put together well, they will work wonders for you. And then of course you want to always move in reverse chronological order. What you've done lately is much more relevant than what you did 10 years ago. Of course, there are exceptions even to that rule, but we're talking about generalities here. The employment history is where you have a chance to really show off like the actual work that you've done. So for each position that you list there, make sure that you say where you are and when and what the position was that you held. Did you get a promotion or did you otherwise change roles while you were there? You can list both of those things, especially if you spent meaningful time in both positions, or you can maybe just list the company once and include both positions under it. That makes it easier for you to contextualize your experience. But the important thing is that you want your employment history entries to be summing up the work that you did when you were with that company. So like your key responsibilities, again, matching keywords if you can, and then if possible, highlighting your accomplishments. The example on the screen is actually really, really good because again, good active verbs, you see that it's focused on metrics and deliverables, and then it talks about key achievements. This is great. It's simple, it's direct, it's positive, it's active, it's effective. And that's the kind of content that you should be working on in your resume. For the education, and I pre-apologize for using a very pixelated graphic here, but the education section is similar in that you want to show people where your expertise came from. But unless the education and the projects that pertain to that expertise really matter to the job at hand, this doesn't need to be as detailed as the employment history. In this example, the applicant just says, where they were, when that was, what they received when they completed, so what their credentials are. And then you can actually note, this is an interesting case. I'm glad I selected this randomly from the internet on Zeddy.com. But you can note that the job they're applying for is in nursing. So their BSN, about their Bachelor of Science in Nursing degree entry, to make sure to mention not just that they have that, but that they got a postgraduate fellowship, right, for having done that. They participated in a particular project that I'm sure pertains to the job that they're applying for here, but then so comes just right out and says that they were summa cum laude. You think, is that important? And you don't always need to include a GPA. In fact, a lot of the times a GPA is just, it's irrelevant. It's not worth including. But if you have a really good GPA, especially if you're new, if you had a 3.5 or higher, let's say, or if you had academic honors, like Latin honors, or if you went to a particularly prestigious school, and some combination of all of those, and you just don't have that much employment experience, by all means, include this stuff. It makes you look smart, right? And it just speaks to the brain of the person who's reviewing this. It's not necessarily fair, but it's true. If you went to Berkeley and you got Latin honors at Berkeley, that looks more impressive on a resume than if you did like I did, and I have career credentials from Northern Virginia Community College. My education is fine. I'm good at my job. but that, these things matter, especially when you're new. So if you can find ways to emphasize excellence in your educational history, do so in this section. This is also where you want to include things like your professional credentials, your continuing education, things like that. This particular person got a project management professional certificate from the Project Management Institute, which, if you don't know, is a really important requirement for many, many project management and other management types of roles in multiple fields. I have a project management certificate, not this one, not nearly that fancy, but then my resume includes that. It also has my BA and my master's degree, but it also, more than those two things, emphasizes my certificates in social media management, social media marketing, online reputation management, community management, and then my certificates from the community college in the different web competencies that I developed over time that helped me get into the actual career that I have, much more so than my undergrad or even graduate degree. They're there because they speak to my expertise and what I'm good at. So we'd like kind of continue to think about those key elements. The one other real important piece is the skill summary portion of your resume. As we saw earlier on Ravi's resume, that was right at the very front of the resume. It can also be toward the end, and again, it depends on your style and what you're trying to communicate. And there's a couple different ways that you can really format your skill summary, but it always boils down to one very simple thing, and this is where you say skills wise what it is that you're good at, and then making sure that the things that you're good at are the same things that the employer is looking for in the job. So what you want to do with this skill summary is customize it. Have a giant list of your own privately that says all the different things that you can do, whether that can be as diverse as GIS and sourdough bread baking if it pertains, but you want to be putting onto the resume a list that makes sense for the job that you're applying for. So cast a broad, kind of a big net with that. Don't lie, but definitely say all the things that you can do that fits the employer's needs. If you don't have quite the best match, but you do have skills that show your ability to learn a particular type of technology. I'm really good at content management systems for websites. I've used about 10 of them. Just because a new one comes along doesn't mean I'm not going to pick it up almost immediately. I will. They're all the same at the end of the day. That's one example. Or maybe, you're really good at particular kinds of systems or software packages. You can write queries all day long, and it doesn't matter what software it is. You can write queries. Those are good. Those are those kinds of good skills that you can include that maybe they don't match perfectly, but they'll still communicate that you're capable of doing whatever the task is. Put those kinds of things a little bit toward the end of the list, just because you want to be emphasizing the stuff that you're really strong at, that really lines up well, but include all the stuff that you can actually do that does pertain. And then as much as you can, include those transferable skills that I've mentioned a couple of times so far. These are skills that are useful for just about any kind of job that you might want to apply for. Teamwork, leadership, organization, communication, speaking, things like that. Some transferable skills can actually be more on the technical or professional side. And that got you into one kind of role, and then they can also help you in another one. So don't think about them just in terms of being able to write well or being able to put together a good PowerPoint. Teaching is actually a really good example. Let's say that you're currently a PhD candidate and part of your work is to teach undergrads. When you're done, you have teaching experience. So now you can arguably use that to get a job in secondary education, right? Or at the university level, but you understand what I'm saying. It's a different kind of a job teaching in university versus teaching high school, but you have skill now that says that you can do it, you can teach. But maybe that same experience in your PhD can be spun up as you can speak well in public, or you can build a good presentation, or you can build a good lesson plan. You're great with Prezi. because you've learned how to do that for class. The point is you get a lot of skills that maybe you don't realize that you have until you really think about them. And a lot of those skills are functionally effective in a lot of different roles. So when you're applying for jobs, think about all the different ways, all the different things that you've done can tie into success in that. So the last thing I want to touch on in this particular vein is these styles of resumes, and I keep referring to that. And there are really three: chronological, functional, and the combination thereof. Spoiler alert. The third one is the other two smashed together. Each one of these approaches has its own strengths. So it's worth it actually to develop resume templates that you can use different styles for each job as you tweak the content of each application. Because sometimes emphasizing different things is going to be more important in different contexts, right? In my experience, the most common resume type is the chronological resume, and it's a good one. It's like the traditional style, right? This is best to use when you have a very clear employment trajectory, from the beginning to the job that you want. So you want to be able to demonstrate that trajectory by using the reverse chronology of your history to show how you've progressed and what you've accomplished along the way. When you're using this style, it's important to flesh out only relevant employment, especially if you've been working for a little while. If you've been as long as I have, 15 years, the last thing you want to do is list every job that you've had in that time. I certainly don't, but I do sometimes mention them, like some of the editorial jobs and stuff like that I've had. Sometimes I'll make sure that they're at least recognized, so I don't have blank spots in my resume, because blank spots can be red flags. But otherwise, what you really want to be doing is keeping the focus here on recent work, recent accomplishments, and the pathway of progressive responsibility, progressive leadership, and things like that you've developed along the way. The sort of the flip side approach is the functional resume. And this is a great one for people who are maybe just getting started or who are trying to make a career change. Functional resumes, this example is great because it's just all skills. In addition to breaking out core qualifications, which is like, it's a listing of skills, but it's very blatantly saying, this is what I'm good at and this is why you should hire me. This one also goes so far as to identify past accomplishments around how they relate to this person's skills, rather than having had success in any particular job. In fact, the employment history is like completely minimized. My guess is because this person, I don't know, but I'm guessing that this person was like working in engineering, but is trying to make a change for themselves into something like planning oriented or like strategy, like a management level kind of role. And then also great is that this is, I think, pretty obviously all one side of a single sheet of paper, which is, if you can do that, you look pretty good if you can say that much about yourself in that little space. But again, these are great for any transitional point in your life where the skills matter more than the experience. And then the last piece is the combo resume, which is increasingly common because people are learning that when you can customize, you're going to have some success. It does combine elements of the other two types, and it's always going to work best when you don't want to necessarily emphasize just one particular side of yourself or one particular approach. You want to be able to blend things together to tell a really, a more complex story about yourself. This particular person, Sally Smith, doesn't have a ton of employment experience, but definitely does have education and projects that line up perfectly with the field that she's trying to get into, right? So she has a little bit of chronology and a little bit of functionality, and it really gets into like a deep dive into what her strong suits are. There's nothing here about what Sally Smith isn't good at. It's all about what Sally Smith is great at. And go so far as to say that even as an undergraduate, she was demonstrating leadership ability, and by not having to go out there and flat out say that I don't have any work experience, it just skips it and goes straight for, the accomplishments in the other realms. So whichever style you choose is up to you, but it should come down to the one that's going to suit your purpose the best. I know I've mentioned how my resume works. I've seen, other people use very straightforward approaches, and some get very, very creative. But it always comes down to the story that you want to tell about yourself, and then finding the format that best lets you tell that story clearly, effectively, and succinctly. One thing, just before we sort of get to the very end notes, I do want to talk about formatting, because the formatting is going to be important for you. No matter how you organize your resume, no matter which style you employ, no matter how well you leverage keywords, it still needs to look good. It has to be clean, it has to be neat, it has to be well organized. You might think that, you can squeeze more content onto the page by making the margins really small. Don't do that. Keep your margins appropriate, as if you were writing a paper, for school, writing a report at work, or whatever have you. Use fonts that are appropriately sized. Nothing too big and garish, also nothing so small that it can't be read. Standardize your fonts. I've been as guilty as anybody of accidentally, using Arial in one place and Calibrian in another. They look similar enough at a quick glance, but in reality, it makes you look sloppy when you do things like that. So stick to just a couple fonts. One that's a little bit larger and bold or otherwise emphasized is good for, headers and things like that. Maybe you italicize dates just to help set them off or something like that, but use the same rule for every element in every instance. And, make sure that the fonts you're using are, simple ones. They're straightforward, they're easy to read. People at the end of the day are still going to be putting their eyes on this, and it has to be something that is easy for them. If they have to work, they're not going to like it, and they're going to throw it away. I did say at the beginning that some creative formatting can be beneficial. And in this case, I deliberately chose this example with our fictitious friend, Susan Moreno, to show you the kinds of creativity that you can actually put into your resume to make it and you stand out in a competitive world. Now, you might not want to do something like this for a lot of jobs, but Susan is a social media specialist, and her skills require her to have this kind of eye for for design and for simple communication. There's a certain infographic sort of feel here, and that those are good things. It's also very clean. It's extremely well organized. Covers literally every base in a very limited amount of space, while also showing that this is a person with a personality and creativity, and those things pertain to the job that she's looking for. Her career pathway is in, social media, which has its like a character all of its own. So in an instant, I have a good feel for who this person is, and I'm interested in her. Granted, if she had more experience, and she only does have 3 positions listed here in her history, or if she had a more extensive portfolio that she wanted to show off, obviously the formatting would be different. But the point is that you can leverage some creative approaches to make your resume something that's actually eye-catching and makes people want to pay attention to. Before we completely wrap all this part up, I did threaten you and say that we were going to talk about cover letters. So I want to touch on it just kind of quickly. You absolutely will and must include in your application, if the employer says that they want it, a cover letter. You don't want to do it. Nobody likes to write cover letters. And almost nobody writes cover letters well, because doing it feels like going to the gallows, and no one particularly is attracted to that. But they are a necessary evil, and you should have an idea of how to do it successfully. In short, your cover letter should be a short professional statement about what you've done and what you can do. In that way, it's basically your resume, but in long form. And it's really a good opportunity, short of the actual interview itself, for you to connect the dots between the work that you've done and what your professional goals are. I included this sample here from Zeddy.com. Can't recommend it enough. But because it includes all of like the common pieces that you need. But truth be told, most cover letters are just emails nowadays. So some of these fancier elements, like the heading, personal info, the layout, style, and stuff like that, aren't really necessary. But I wanted you to be able to see the whole thing, and then I actually encourage you to go online, see if you can't find this example on that website, or just find other examples on, here and there, even in your own. If you're an institution right now and they have a career services office, they can show you examples too. But you want to find some guys to practice writing these with. Part of the reason I like this one so much is it's so simple. This is like half the length of the cover letter that I usually write. But it's just so good because it says so much. It's so few words. I am Jane Redlock, and I am interested in this position. I will be good at it because of the successes that I've had. It matches my objectives for X reasons. And I encourage you, hiring manager, to read more about my experience in my resume, which is attached to this application, after which you no doubt will want to reach out to interview me. It even includes a little extra enticement in the postscript, which frankly, I've never done before, but that is such a good, I'm impressed by this. I know it's an example, but I'm impressed by it. It makes me, I feel like inspired to do it myself. What a way to just say, I'm knocking this out of the park. But what's additionally interesting about this cover letter is the way that it just really tells Jane's story, right? People don't like to write cover letters, and there's this fear that you're going to unnecessarily offend the person who reads it. So you wind up writing this really staid, boring document that doesn't say anything. It's lifeless. And so don't write that way. Write like how fictitious Jane wrote. Inject a little bit of personality there. Say that you're good at the things that you're good at, and also that you're a real person. You're not just like a job applying automaton. You are a human who can contribute something more than just being an executor of a job. For what it's worth, a lot of what you're doing when you're looking for a job is you should basically be evaluating them the same way they're evaluating you, right? You want a good fit. Sometimes you don't have the luxury of picking the best thing. You're gonna pick the maybe the one opportunity that does come along. I know it's competitive. It's a tough time out there. But insofar as you can, you should be judicious about the opportunities that you search for. Is there a good culture there? Is there a good support for you and your objectives in your career? In addition to salary and benefits and things like that, those things matter. And by putting a little bit of yourself into stuff like your cover letter, you help to basically run up a little flag that says who you are. And that is actually the kind of thing that will matter in that review process. And that'll help you find the best fit for you and for them. But in general, that's resumes and briefly cover letters in a nutshell. I just do want to make sure to reiterate a few things here at the end. One, of course, I keep saying it, keywords. Use them, match them up with the employer's wish list. Use the same keywords between the resume and the cover letter. That's also important. And both of those documents, which again, they sort of reflect one another. You want to be demonstrating impact, using active, authoritative language about yourself. Don't speak in generalities, speak in specifics. It's like just a really great way of showing that you've made measurable contributions, which matters a whole lot for most hiring people. Where it's appropriate to do so, you do want to highlight your transferable and like widely transferable, if the case applies, skills, because they can help to give you an edge in certain contexts, and they can be the thing that actually gets you the job if you're in that transitional period for yourself. You do want to develop template resumes, of each style if you think it's important, but you definitely want to have at least one that works really, really well for your strengths, into which you can inject all of the necessary, whether it's keyword changes, whether it's emphasizing different things that you've done in different jobs, just so it's easy to tweak and customize for each position. It makes the application process easier, And frankly, it helps after you've done it a few times, you really start to think about how you communicate about yourself that way. And then when it comes to the cover letter in particular, but also within your resume, you want to be telling that story about what you can do, why you're perfect for the job. That's the whole point of doing these documents. So be deliberate about it and think about, what makes you special, what sells you as an applicant for this position, and then make sure that stuff is reflected in your documents, because you might otherwise might not make it to the interview phase, and if they don't make it there, then you won't get hired. It's usually how it works. So just a good approach to take. And then last things, some next steps for you to take. Obviously, I've pitched a particular website and some other resources over the course of this talk. But you can check out on a link to some of these resources that I have. Well, actually, my intern, I should give her credit. My intern, Apple Chavez, collected, and those are available both on the Career Central website, and they're attached as a handout with this presentation. You can also sign up for a one-on-one resume review through the Career Central website. So I recommend you check that out and try to get in on one of those before the meeting is over. We also have sessions on interviewing skills and on networking skills that I recommend you check out, both of which will be shorter than this. We try to touch on high level stuff and then get you out there to practice more so than the slightly more longer form content. I recommend for everybody to get to talk with, in particular, our early career ecologist sections mentoring program. They do foster really good opportunities for folks, obviously particularly students and early career folks, to connect with professionals and get some really guided guidance. I'm trying to think of a better way of describing it, but that mentoring program is really good. It's been running for several years now, and it grows all the time. Other sections have their own mentoring programs, and if you are a participant in our SEEDS program, we also have mentoring within SEEDS as well, so that's worth checking out. And then the simplest thing is, while you're developing these materials, have a colleague, a friend, a coworker, a advisor, somebody, just get feedback. Have people look at your materials and tell you if it's effective. That's the simplest way to get some meaningful critique of these fairly important documents. Obviously you're going to do a few different takes of them over time, but they're going to only get better through the process overview. It's like a scientific paper. So I always recommend that people get that from other folks. At that point, folks, though, I want to thank you for participating in this. If you do have any questions, I'm not doing a live Q&A session for this, but I am signed up for asynchronous, so you can ask questions through the app. And if you do so, it may take me a little bit of time to get back to you, but I'll try to be as helpful as I can. I do really recommend that you sign up for a live review, though, just because you'll get the really good personalized attention. Otherwise, thanks for being part of ESA, and I hope you enjoy the rest of the meeting.